particularly in America, we're so focused on like being the individual and being so independent. And like, really, I think, yes, that's important, but sometimes we heal, we improve, we better ourselves through community.
Hello, wonderful people, and welcome to Meaningful Conversations podcast, episode number 8. We are close to double digits, and that's very exciting. Today, we have an important topic to discuss, and that is of cybersecurity and your PII. Personal identifiable information. We're going to jump into the definitions with Caroline, but for now, let me tell you more about her. Caroline is going to be my guest today. So, Caroline Sue is a technologist and ethicist who investigates how identity shapes online experiences. She cares deeply about how these experiences can move people to co create a more socially responsible, human-centered future of technology. Her experience spans sales engineering and solution architecture for Fortune 500 clients, and she holds a degree in philosophy from Bryn Mawr College, with additional studies in economics and tech ethics. Caroline is co-founder of Cyber Collective, which empowers people to think critically about their relationship with the internet while helping them become more private and secure online. Can't wait to jump into our conversation because there's going to be so much goodness, so many personal examples, etc. So let's dive in. Hi, Caroline. How are you?
Hi, Masha. I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm super excited for this conversation. And this stuff is so important. So I'm so glad that we're having this discussion.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I'm like very excited to kind of share my thoughts and get this information out there.
Absolutely. And we have some very important topics to dig in. Let's start with PII. What is PII? Why is it important to protect it? And what are the threats of having your PII on display to the public?
Yeah, I love this question. Such a good question. I'll start out with kind of the textbook definition of PII, which, there are a lot of different definitions depending on like where in the world you are, but for simplicity's sake, I think it's really easy to think of PII as potentially two kind of interrelated things. So first, PII is information that is like very obviously yours. It's uniquely yours. So if you think about a social security number or maybe like a passport number, driver's license number, those pieces of information are directly tied to you. So that is yours and yours alone. Another useful way to think about PII too is thinking about how anonymous seeming information can be used and combined together to figure out who you are. So for that, I want to share a quick anecdote. Professor Latanya Sweeney, she's at the Harvard Kennedy School, total badass, used to be the CTO of the US Federal Trade Commission. She was doing some research back at least in the late 90s, actually, and she was able to figure out from a so-called anonymized medical record the identity of a patient based on purely their gender, birth date, and zip code. So alone, gender, birth date, zip code seems like fairly anonymous. She found that when you put those three pieces of information together, you can actually identify 87% of the US population, at least at that time. That's also another way to think of PII. So it's information that's not just tied to you, that's really important, but it's also information of yours that seems kind of anonymous that can be used to identify you in combination with each other. So I think the threats of having your PII kind of out there and on display, two main things. So one is a little bit more existential, a little theoretical, a little philosophical. When you have access into someone's personal life, when you have access into their personal thoughts, the things that they do on a daily basis, you can actually end up having a lot of power over that person and the actions that they take in their lives. So an easy example of this that is maybe kind of somewhat benign is looking at Instagram. Have you ever gotten an ad on Instagram where it's like, wow, this is actually something that I would buy, and then you buy it? Like, I'm definitely guilty of that. And that's like one of the more benign examples. Like, think of potentially there are bigger harms that could be at play if, these big companies or certain cyber criminals know exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and know how to kind of change your behavior based on that. So that's one risk that's a little bit existential. It's really a risk to our autonomy and agency as human beings. Another risk of having PII out there is actually kind of tied towards security. Having that information on display on social media and other places that maybe we're not really thinking of explicitly protecting our data, that can actually be a threat to our security, whether that's online or in real life.
It's crazy to think about how real those online threats become, how quickly they can become real. Because I've
Mm.
had so many examples. I used to work at YouTube, and I had so many examples of creators who, share their public persona, and of course sometimes share personal details. Or, this one
Mhm.
girl was recording videos from her living room or something like that, and people figured out where she lives based on the view outside of her window. And the online very quickly became offline, an offline danger, because that leaked, and it just, it really quickly, she had to move, because she felt
Yeah.
threatened. And we live in the world of oversharing, right? All of that information that you have just quoted can probably be easily found if somebody really tried to dig that information out of us. If they knew what information they were looking for, it would probably be very easy to get it. And the moment when I realized this was, remember this trend during the spring when everybody who could get vaccinated for COVID-19 would share their vaccination cards, would proudly
Mhm.
share their vaccination cards. And I remember a post by Cyber Collective saying, do not do that, because that contains your personally identifiable information, PII, your name and your birthday. And with that information, people who are trying to do bad things can do really bad things. And that made me think about how we're sharing our birthdays, our friends'
Mhm.
birthdays, like, happy birthday, friend X, I love you so much, and like post a bunch of stories, partying together, all that stuff. But everybody knows the date. And if they know the age, they can figure out the year. They know the name, they can do some digging. It's pretty scary and creepy. So,
Yep.
in what other unexpected ways we are sharing our PII essentially?
Wow, I love this question. And I also love that you're thinking about like how are we sharing our friends' PII? So I'll definitely talk about that too. One of the example or a couple of the examples that I kind of came up with have a lot to do with like the visual, because Instagram is the platform that I'm personally the most familiar with. And so it's a lot of visual, it's videos, it's photos, and that sort of thing. So one surprising way that I think is important for all of us to think about, especially as we go into the holiday season, travel is ramping back up, is actually boarding passes. So people will post pictures of their boarding passes without realizing that there are two kind of sensitive areas on those passes that can be used to find more of their personal information. Particularly with a bit of social engineering, it's doable. It's very doable. So one example is the barcode. The barcode on there actually has probably good amount of information like your name, potentially your frequent flyer number, things that are truly PII tied to you, are stored in that barcode, and all someone needs is a barcode scanner. So that is one very sensitive area that we should look out for, and make sure that we're not posting that area if we do decide to post a barcode. Another place on a boarding pass that is fairly sensitive is the booking reference number. There's actually a really funny story of this guy and his friend challenged him to break into Tony Abbott's accounts of some sort and like gain personal information, access to his personal information that he was not supposed to have. So what does he do? He basically trawls through Tony Abbott's Instagram, and by the way, he's the former Prime Minister of Australia, so very high up there, kind of politician, very high profile. He basically just trawled his Instagram and looked for a post where there was a boarding pass. And in the boarding pass, there was a booking reference number that he then used to go on the airline's website. He did a little inspect source, looked through the HTML, and was able to find Tony Abbott's passport number. And so, he went on this wild goose chase and was basically trying to like contact his office and all the airlines, all these other places, saying like, hey, this is like a really big security loophole. Just wanted to let you know that this is happening. So I think all is well that ends well, but that is a funny slash interesting slash a little scary anecdote to show us, why it's important that we think about the visual cues and the information that we're sharing on Instagram, for example. Another example that I want to share, also having to do with photography, is the kinds of photos of our families and children that we post online. This is really, really important. I was speaking to someone in the Cyber Collective community, actually. Her name is Claire Rodehaver, and she is a photographer who takes family portraits. She's also an educator in the kind of crossover between privacy and photography. And she mentioned something similar to what you did, that in family photos, she likes to kind of tell the parents and let them know, hey, if you're going to share this on social media, the colors of the foliage and the trees in the background can actually give away your physical location. So be careful of that. So that's kind of more on the security side of things. In the more existential side, that's kind of affecting us as human beings, she's actually also gotten a lot of DMs recently from now adults whose parents shared photos of them as children on Instagram all over the place, and how it's actually causing them as adults a lot of like mental trauma and mental health issues, because that's out of their control. The information is already out there, and it's very, very hard once you put something on the internet to make it go away. In particular, she's also noticed trans folks who are in her DMs saying that, maybe their parents are refusing to take photos offline of them before their transition. So this can be really, really harmful, even just on a relationship to relationship basis. But think about when it's on Instagram, it's public, it's in there, even if they have a private account, it's still all within their own social networks. So that's something that's really, really important to think about as well, is how are we sharing the PII of our friends and family and people that we care about, just like you mentioned.
100%. How can we be more respectful of everybody else, not just the people we love, but everybody, right, on the
Yes.
internet, because it's a collective experience. We should all strive to do our part and be respectful and respect everybody's boundaries and wishes. On the baby front, it's crazy that, because I keep on thinking about the generation of people who grow up who have had no privacy because their parents had access to the internet. And it's crazy that they're already there. I thought it would be, in a few years, but no, they're already there. I don't know. My husband and I have a very strict rule of whenever we have children, they're not going to be and my husband doesn't give me permission to put him on my social media, and I respect that. So
Mm,
there's none of, like, it's just, you got to respect each other's privacy, each other's, and maybe ask. um
yeah.
which actually brings me to my next question. How how do we go about this? What do you think the solution to this oversharing or controlling what we share is, in your opinion? Should we stop, displaying and publicly celebrating each other's birthdays? Like, what do we do?
So there are a couple of solutions, some a little bit more in depth and technical than others. And I want to start off with kind of the low hanging fruit, the stuff that we can do today. So a couple things here are just really slowing down, being mindful about what we're clicking on, who we're talking to online, what kinds of information we're sharing, what kinds of things we're posting. I think we're definitely in an age where technology moves so incredibly quickly. It's so fast. I mean, even just the fact that we're talking to each other, this is like a high quality call. That's fast, like in a very literal sense. But the flow of information, the spread of information, how quickly we respond to things and our habits are online are incredibly fast. So important here is to slow down, be mindful about what we're clicking, what we're sharing, putting out into the world, and really thinking critically about the choices that we're making online, being intentional about that.
Absolutely. I love the point about slowing down, because I feel like technology is developing faster than we can blink. And of course, vulnerabilities are being created faster than we can blink as well. So the
Yes.
more mindful we are about our use of technology and what we share, and the more times we reflect, why are we sharing this, right? Because sometimes it's like, am I sharing this to boost my ego? Can I do I really need this external validation right
Yes.
now? I love your point about that. That's great. Let's switch gears and talk about privacy. because it gets even creepier here. What what are some of the nightmare scenarios that you see happening if we don't prevent companies from tracking our data? And what types of data is the creepiest in your opinion?
I try not to be too much of a pessimist, so I'll start out by saying that. But I think we're kind of living in our nightmare scenario right now, or at least maybe one of them. We're getting there. I think one of the really big issues that I think it's sort of hard to connect the dots when you first look at it, but a lot of our data is actually used to power decision making algorithms. So this is really useful in a lot of ways because sometimes it is too much work to decide, you know, what kinds of things we're going to pursue or what kind of work we're going to do. And that's a lot of the utility of these decision making algorithms. So when you hear someone say like AI, machine learning, that's often what they're talking about is some kind of algorithm that takes in information and then spits out a decision. Going a little bit deeper, these algorithms actually show us, a lot of different things. So it shows us the stuff that we're looking at on our news feeds. So if you think about like disinformation and misinformation, particularly during elections and during COVID, that's a lot of the engine, the machine that's driving the spread of that kind of information. These systems are also responsible for example, deciding who gets a loan, who gets housing, who gets a job. And again, like for humans, it just might be too much work to sift through a bunch of credit card applications that you're getting, several per second, for example. So it makes sense to use them in those scenarios, but the way that these models are trained and are able to make those decisions is that they're trained on the data that we are sharing, whether we know it or not, online, offline, in our habits, where we go and visit, what zip code we live in, what are our browsing habits, that sort of thing. It is somewhat of a nightmare scenario to me, without trying to sound too dramatic, that like our digital exhaust, the fact that we are just trying to live our lives online, we're trying to connect with each other, we're trying to have conversations, we're trying to go to school, do our work, maybe take care of our banking, things like that online. We're just trying to live our lives. And the fact that this information can be used to power the machines that, yes, are useful, but also have the risk of perpetuating social and economic inequities, that's pretty nightmarish to me.
Absolutely. And it creates further biases in the system. It's not helping further society and equality of anyone.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say also you also asked the question of what types of data are the creepiest in my opinion. All of it. And maybe it's not so much the types of data, but the way that the data is used. If Instagram is literally tracking my habits and they know every single thing that I'm looking at and how much time I'm spending on each post, that to me is a bit troubling because it can be used for, nefarious reasons too.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've noticed because I have a personal account on Instagram and I have a Stereotype Breakers account on Instagram, and just the way it serves notifications to those different accounts is different.
Wow.
Like, even that. Because my personal account, it knows that I know a lot of those people personally, and I kind of care about who likes, well, I mean, yeah. I sometimes I do check who likes photos,
Yeah,
like it's a
definitely.
normal human thing. And so it serves me notifications one by one so that I can see who is doing it, so that I keep on opening the app. While Stereotype
Yep.
Breakers, it's a business. And yes, while I care about engagement and all that stuff, I'm not going to go through and being like, oh, this friend from high school, you know? It's very creepy.
Definitely.
And Cyber Collective talks about privacy a lot, giving actionable steps on how to be proactive about protecting it. What are some of the basic principles that you think everyone should implement in order to protect their privacy?
Yeah, definitely. So I think one really, really useful tool here is this concept of threat modeling. And this is present in cybersecurity when you're trying to build a system and you're trying to secure it down. You ask yourself a couple of different questions and assess the system based on that. The same thing can apply to privacy too. And threat modeling, I use that word because, if anyone who's listening wants to do additional research, that's where you can kind of dig in and find a bit more information on that. I like to call it a privacy plan or a security plan if you're working on that. But it's basically five basic questions. So it's, what information am I trying to protect? Is it photos? Is it my habits? Is it my location information? And who am I trying to protect it against? Am I trying to protect against Google, Facebook, cyber criminals, other actors in the space who might have access or who might gain access to our information? So far it's what data am I trying to protect? Who am I trying to protect it against? And the third question is, what are the consequences if I don't protect this information and it gets out? So is it that, oh, maybe they'll be able to manipulate my behavior through Instagram ads? Or is it, okay, there's a real privacy and security threat here that might endanger myself or my family? The next question is tied to that, which is how likely is it for that scenario to happen? So that consequence that you just figured out, that is really personal to you, that's really bad for you, how likely is that really to happen? And then the last question I think is really, really important. It's what am I willing to do to protect my privacy? Privacy is definitely on a continuum with convenience. So there are constantly trade offs. If we're taking steps to protect our privacy, we're constantly going to be making trade offs. And one example to illustrate this is with password managers. I think both of us have run into situations where, people are asking us advice and they're saying, okay, how can I actually protect my information? How can I secure my own personal operational security down? And one of the first pieces of advice is pretty consistently from a lot of people like, hey, use a password manager. It seems like a really big task for a lot of people, like, oh, this is going to be so inconvenient. I might have my password memorized, it's muscle memory, and now I have to go to this separate application. So that's kind of a decision that, everyone needs to make for themselves and decide okay, what kind of convenience am I willing to give up in the name of privacy? And that's the tone of all of these questions generally too, is that privacy is a very personal decision. You've got to figure out what's important to you and what you're willing to do to protect your privacy.
Yeah, I love that holistic approach and really assessing it for yourself because, like you said, it will be different things for different people just based on their, even my neighbor may have, geographically in proximity of each other, may have a different situation because of their job, their other things that come into place, all of those variables. Very important to think of that as an aggregate. Thank you for giving us this model, and I'm sure a lot of people will research this further, or at least I really hope so.
I hope so too.
Let's switch gears and talk about Cyber Collective.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about Cyber Collective and what are your goals with it and why?
Yeah, definitely. So, Cyber Collective at our core, we are a women of color owned and operated organization, and we do education around privacy and security. Our mission is to really get people to think critically about their relationship with the internet. Again, kind of fighting back against the status quo of the internet and technology being so fast. It's encouraging people to slow down, take a breath, think critically about what they're sharing, clicking, and doing online to basically cultivate their own agency and autonomy. So that's at our core what we do. And we do this through a couple of different ways. So one of them is by providing educational resources on privacy and security through our Instagram account. It's all very accessible. There are a lot of really good memes, a lot of very good informational content that the folks on our team so brilliantly post on that account. So that's one we do it. We've also held a number of events in the past and just wanted to kind of create this open dialogue where, number one, we're educating people, we're teaching them the concepts in privacy and security that are kind of a little bit technical and hard to find information on, and presenting this in a way that's very accessible in language that people actually understand, that they can take and turn into actionable steps in their own lives. Part of that conversation too is us getting their feedback and saying, okay, how does this affect you? Are there any ways that you can foresee this affecting your family, your community, people around you? And what does that look like? What are some of your concerns? So really trying to understand the problems that they're facing that are really tied to their community, their identity, and their experience of the internet. Ultimately, what we want to do is really create a future where people like you and me, as individuals, not necessarily as experts, can really participate in the conversations that actually drive the future of technology. So instead of tech being built by tech builders and developers and data scientists alone, basically creating some, not just some form of mechanism to make this happen, but also giving people the tools to understand their relationship with the internet, to understand the technology, and be able to give really valuable feedback that says, like, hey, these are maybe some of your blind spots. Like, these are some of the consequences that we see coming from this technology. How are you going to address that? The purpose of educating people is to really make them active participants in this dialogue, and co-create a better future of technology that works for everyone.
I have goosebumps right now because what you're doing is, oh my God, we need that so much because our privacy is not taken into consideration when building a lot of these products. And the deeper I get into understanding cybersecurity, the more I understand how products are not built with security in mind, privacy in mind, which is very unfortunate. And we need more people to pressure these companies to take that into consideration. Luckily, there are more laws and regulations that are coming out on government level, all over the world. And hopefully, we'll see more of that. And thank you for what you're doing. We need this. And I love your Instagram account. It makes me laugh daily. Those memes are awesome. And they're so timely as well. I just finished the third season of You, and the meme, of course, was there immediately. It's just, I love your account. It just makes me laugh all the time. So, to anyone who is listening this, you got to follow that account to stay updated and also to be entertained, which I think is the perfect mix here.
Wonderful. We're doing our job, it sounds like. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let's get personal right now without
Yeah.
oversharing, if that is possible. Let's find that that line that we
Yeah.
don't cross. So I like to ask my guests about some of their biggest mistakes that they've made and what they've learned from them, because I feel like you learn so much more from mistakes than from achievements, right? Because it makes you reflect and all of that good stuff. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you've made throughout your life and career and in personal cybersecurity? And what did you learn from them?
That is a very good question. I will say, I think personally and professionally, I have struggled in the past, and to this day, I struggle with asking for help at the right time and timing that. I grew up very much like needing to be independent and take care of myself. And so everything was on me. The pressure was on me to just like make things happen and do everything essentially. And as I've gotten older, I think I've learned this really valuable lesson of like, actually, it's not independence that I'm personally looking for, it's interdependence. So community is so important. That's why Cyber Collective is like so near and dear to my heart, because it's like we can't do this alone. It has to be within community. We have to have that kind of support, and it's so much better that way. So I've definitely made mistakes of, not asking for help, costing clients money, breaking trust in relationships, whether that's working or personal. And coming out of that, I'm like, okay, how am I going to structure this? Like, how do I actually fix this problem? At work, there's something that I really like. It's I think it's common amongst developers called the 15-minute rule. If you are stuck on a problem for 15 minutes, you set a timer, you try your darndest to figure that thing out, you put forth your effort. Um, then when that timer is up, that 15 minutes is up, you can go and ask someone. Actually, you have to go and ask someone. Like, that is the habit to build, because they might see something that you don't see. And in working for those 15 minutes, you're able to say, okay, these are the steps that I took. You can tell the person, like, hey, these are the steps that I took. And they can tell you, oh, actually, this is where you went wrong. And this is how you would do it differently. So that's something that at work I find really, really helpful. In my personal life, I think it's, again, leaning on community, leaning on family and friends and trusted people to say, like, hey, if you see me going off the rails, obviously I'm going to do my best to try to ask for help when I need to. But if you see something of mine that you're like, you probably need to bring in some backup, please tell me, like, help me through that. I think particularly in America, we're so focused on like being the individual and being so independent. And like, really, I think Yes, that's important, but sometimes we heal, we improve, we better ourselves through community.
Music to my ears. Honestly, I that's one of the things that I struggle with so much because I'm a child of divorce, and of course my mom was telling me all of these things about be an independent woman,
Yes,
only
yeah.
rely on yourself. And while those are incredible affirmations, they drive you forward, they also hold you back from that ability to ask for help. You feel like you're weak if you don't rely on yourself all the time, and it is a skill, it is a habit, like you're saying. It's a habit, it's a pattern that we I could talk for hours about this,
Yep.
but I feel like everything we learned, and I was just journaling about this yesterday. I feel like everything we learn as children are just patterns that we just don't notice until a certain age. And when we notice it, we regret not having worked through it before. But it's just, yeah. And we sometimes blame our parents for messing us up, but it's actually just a pattern. Everybody messes up their children. Anyway, sorry,
Totally.
I went on a
That's
tangent here.
normal. I'm with you. I followed every single thing that you were saying, and it just makes sense.
It really does. And yeah, asking for help and knowing when to ask for help. I love that. I'm going to try implementing that 15-minute rule in my own life and work as well, because I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course,
And
yeah.
and how can people follow your journey and learn more about your work?
Basically, for anyone who's listening, if you're interested in basically anything that I've talked about, privacy or security related or related to tech and humanity and tech and society, definitely follow Cyber Collective. You can find us online, cybercollective.org, or at cybercollective.org on Instagram. If you want to connect with me personally, my website has a contact form. You can reach me there. The website is carolineh.su. So that's my name, Caroline Sue, and the dot is between the H and the S.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caroline. This has been amazing. And I hope that a lot of people will take some actionable steps having listened to this conversation.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Caroline, thank you so, so much. So insightful, so practical. And also, those stories just add that much more detail, that much more, I don't know, realisticness, if that's a word, to this conversation, because cybersecurity is so important. And I really hope that more people take action after listening to this interview, because unfortunately that online threat becomes real life threat, physical threat, very quickly and easily, and you need to make sure that it doesn't, because that's scary and creepy, and I don't want that to happen to you. Make sure you follow Cyber Collective on Instagram, because their content is awesome and incredibly entertaining while being very actionable. And you know how to reach out to Caroline if you'd like to. All of the links will be provided in the show notes and also in the description of this episode. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you. Can't wait for episode number 10, where we break those double digits. And yeah, please leave us a review on social media. Would love to hear your opinion about this podcast format, everything. Love feedback, so please give it to us via, your messages on social media, and of course by replying to our email newsletter directly. Subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already. If you just stumbled on this episode, I mean, you know what to do. It's free content coming at you every single week. Right now, we have a cadence of every Wednesday. And if you're watching this on YouTube, let me know what was the most surprising thing that you've learned from this interview. Very curious to know. Thank you for being here, friends. Have a wonderful time today you're currently experiencing. Bye.